second Growth with Garrett, because that's what we're calling this now. I'm going to talk about faith today and talk about how there's a difference between exercising our knowledge and exercising our faith, and acting based off of knowledge versus faith. And we're going to start in Hebrews 11:3, where it says, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, and what we see now did not come from anything that can be seen." And now what I want to point out here is there's a difference in between exercising our knowledge and using our knowledge and exercising our faith. And it says by faith we understand. And it doesn't say by our understanding we gain faith, because faith isn't using our knowledge to make an action. It is looking to the Lord despite our lack of knowledge on what's going on, but we still trust in the Lord and what He's going to do. And there are people who may pray for God to open a door. We may pray, God, please let me get a job. But part of it's not just praying and asking for God to give you a job. You also have to go out and apply, because it's not very often that God's going to just have someone come up to you and offer you a job, because God, acting in faith isn't just asking for something, it's going out and acting and doing something about it. So we are called to exercise our faith, not just our knowledge. And God doesn't teach us. God teaches us through us acting in faith. He doesn't grow our faith based off of the knowledge of the situation, because faith is about acting despite what we may know or not know. And when we pray for God to open a door, there's a difference between praying and just like hoping for the door to open, and acting in faith and trusting, where we go up and like knock on the door. So the definition of faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. And that's there's a difference between having hope and having faith, because hope is the saying goes, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. That's where you want something to happen, but you're still just ready for something to go wrong. And your priority is if it doesn't go well, but you still want this one thing to happen. But faith is knowing that the best is yet to come, and acting off of that, and acting off of your trust in the Lord, rather than what you may be hoping and then just trying to play it safe. So there's a difference between asking for something and acting for something. And God calls us to act, because faith doesn't need evidence. It is the evidence. And it says, I think in other versions it says, faith is the evidence of things unseen. So it's that our faith is the evidence that we need. It's not that we need evidence to act off of faith. Now, in Hebrews 11:7, it's talking about a bunch of people who acted off of faith in the Old Testament, and it says, "It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith." Now, I'm assuming that most of you guys know the story of Noah, but it was through Noah's faith that God gave him the ability and the materials and just provided for Noah to be able to make this ark. Because making an ark the size of what it says in the Bible is, it would take a lot of resources, a lot of time, effort, especially back then when they don't have like cranes to do it, to help make it easier or whatever. But it was because Noah was acting in his faith that God gave him the ability to get this done. And in our family, we have this saying: whenever we don't want to do something, my dad or my mom would come out and say, "You have to do it immediately, completely, without comment and without complaining." And that just made me think about how Noah, he didn't hesitate. He got straight to work when God called him to do it. So he did it immediately. He did it completely. He followed God's exact instructions and his exact plan, and he did it without comment and without complaining. And Noah probably had his doubts. He might have asked God to show him a sign that God was still with him in this, because he didn't want to, like maybe Noah probably didn't want to make an ark. That probably wasn't what he had planned for the next 100 years of his life. But he still did it despite his doubts, and that was him acting off of faith. And although God didn't show him any signs, he still got to work and he followed God's instructions completely. And through that, God blessed Noah and his family. And he acted based off of faith and not facts. He didn't. It says that he obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. So he acted despite it was something that was unknown and it seemed impossible. And that's what we're called to do. We're called to act on the impossible, because we serve the God who can do the impossible. And now I'd like to turn to Genesis 7:11-13, where this is the story of Noah originally, and it says, "When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky. The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights. That very day, Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." Might have butchered that name, and their wives. And what I want to point out here is that it says that very day Noah had gone into the boat. So God had already planned it so that they were ready to go into the boat right when it was needed, and God had prepared it all so that Noah would be rewarded for his faith and for his action. And we don't know specifically how old Noah was when he was called to build the ark, but we know that he was 500 years old when he was the father of when he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And that when it says here that he was 600 years old when it started to rain, and that means that he had been working on the ark for maybe a little bit less than 100 years, and he was acting consistently off of faith for 100 years. And it doesn't talk about how God brought in like little storms to show Noah, like, oh, this is what I'm calling him to. But God gave him the opportunity to act based off of his faith despite all the evidence. And maybe there was probably a bunch of people around him who were telling him, this isn't going to happen, it's never happened before, what makes you think that your God's going to do this now? And there was probably a bunch of people around him doubting God and telling him what he's doing is a waste of time. But despite that, he was acting despite the opposition. And Noah, as I said, he probably had his doubts. He might have prayed for God to send him a monkey or something like that to just show that God was going to do what he had said. But it says that the animals didn't start to come to Noah until 7 days before the flood, which means he had gone almost 100 years without any real, any big signs that were God's doing this and this is what God has in store. He had to act based on his faith despite all the lack of evidence that he had, because he let God be his evidence. And even when God wasn't giving any proof, Noah still stuck to it, because even though there was no evidence of a flood coming, he still prepared for this flood. And God didn't bring any evidence until he had already done what he was called to do. And if he waited for God to bring evidence and he waited for God to send that monkey or whatever, but if he waited for God to bring evidence to him, it would have been maybe, like it says, 7 days before the flood that there was animals that started to come. So he would have had 7 days to build this giant ark that took him almost 100 years. So it was because he acted off of faith despite the doubts and the cost and the labor that it would have taken. God rewarded him for his faithfulness to him, and God brought him knowledge based off of his faith. It was God gave him the ability and the energy and the materials to build the ark because Noah was building the ark. Noah didn't wait back and wait for the materials to all be in front of him and he's like, okay, now we can get to work. He started working because he trusted God to bring what was needed and give him the ability for what was needed. And Noah realized his lack of understanding, but rather than letting that lack of understanding scare him or give him doubts that were holding him back, he leaned on the Father's strength because he knew that he didn't have enough strength. So in admitting that he didn't know and he didn't have all the knowledge about what was going to come ahead, he turned to the one who did know. And he looked at it not as, I don't know and I can't do this. He looked at it as, I may not know, but I know he who does know. And faith isn't knowing about the situation. It's about admitting that we don't know and trusting the one who does know. And God rewards people who act off of faith, not acting based off of their own understanding. So when we go out and knock on the door rather than just asking for God to open the door, then that's when God's going to be more likely to respond to it, because he's seeing that we're taking action in his plan rather than expecting him to do all the action himself. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, send it to a friend, whatever you'd like. But I hope you enjoyed that, and God bless you this week.